Well, when you get to see all the Triple Crown races just like that, obviously figuring prominently the silks of the WinStar farm. But let's go back to right before the Kentucky Derby. And on the Kentucky Derby trail, the most dominant looking horse would defect right before the race, Christina.
Yeah, Mike, I think we can talk about that in just about every year. But losing Escandarea this year was a real big blow, obviously for the connections, but also for everyone in racing. I think we were all looking forward to what he could do coming off the Florida Derby, coming off the Wood Memorial. Who knows what might have been? We can always talk about that. But I think when we really look back to the 2010 Kentucky Derby, you have to look to Todd Pletcher. You know, arguably one of the best trainers in America. For him to finally get his Derby, it was really nice to see him in the winner's circle there.
But oddly enough, Escandarea's defection, we talked about this, Simon, may have helped him because I think he was more laid back. Once that happened and the pressure was off of, oh, you're definitely going to win it with Escandarea, I think he was in a different mode.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly because there was so much pressure on him with Escandarea. Let's face it, when we look back on the Triple Crown season, 3 different winners, 3 different runners-up, 8 different horses in the money in all 3 races. So it was a wide-open group. The one thing I will follow up with Christina Fess and Escandarea had stayed around, he might have been able to sweep the gamut here because I thought the 3-year-old crop as a whole was relatively weak across the board.
You know, one of the best 3-year-olds from the beginning of the year to the end of the year was Looking at Lucky. And how many storylines, Todd, going into the Preakness and coming out of the Preakness could we focus on? There's so many different lines.
Well, yeah, and with Looking at Lucky, his race in the Kentucky Derby ended with his post-position draw. So at least in the Preakness, we got to see what he was truly capable of. And then it came down to would he show up in the Belmont, and Bob Baffert took kind of a cautious route. But there was no doubt coming out of the Preakness, he reemerged as the best 3-year-old out there.
Yeah, no question about that. Gave Bob Baffert another Preakness win, tied him for Lucas all-time with 5 wins. So that was a feather in his cap. But I think he probably emerged out of the Triple Crown as the best 3-year-old.
I think when you consider what he went on to do throughout the remaining part of the year as well, I mean, 4th in the Breeders' Cup Classic after a long year and a long campaign, great training from Bob Baffert and just a top-quality horse.
I don't think the teletimer lies in this case. When you look at the times, the winning times of each of those Triple Crown races, they're not overwhelming, especially that Belmont, which shaded 232.
Yeah, 232. What's the Secretary track record? 224 or something?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he would have beat this group by 35 lengths. The winner was Drosselmeyer. You touched on it at the top, Mike, WinStar Farm. I think credit to them. They won 2 Triple Crown races with 2 different horses. That's the first time that's been done in many, many years. So a great victory for them in both those first and third legs of the Triple Crown.
Yeah, Kenny Trout, Bill Kazner. Bill Kazner, he's so gracious, always makes himself so available to the media, and we've gotten to know him over the last few years, too.
And, you know, the other part to this, I think that has to be mentioned, if you're going to talk about human connections, Calvin Borel. I mean, wouldn't he be your first choice if you've got a horse going to the Kentucky Derby? If you don't have a rider locked up, you take Calvin Borel.
Yeah, absolutely. What he's done, not only this year, but in the last few years, just incredible there at Churchill Downs. And Mike Smith, his first Belmont win in an obviously Hall of Fame career. He takes his first Belmont this year.
Yeah, and he completes his personal Triple Crown. He'd won a Derby with Giacomo, a Preakness with Prairie Bayou, now the Belmont. And while we're touching on jockeys, Martin Garcia, I think that was his coming out party in the Preakness on a national scale, because remember, Garrett Gomez got taken off after that dreadful trip in the Derby, and that put Garcia in the forefront on the national picture, and he lived up to that.
Think about the story arc that came into the Preakness with Martin Garcia. We remember he was an apprentice, and it was the sandwich maker from Bay Meadows, and he took off, and he was one of the best apprentices we'd seen in years here in Southern California. And then his career tailed off. Like, once he lost that weight allowance, he became average as far as a winning jockey.
Yeah, 2 words gave him a resurgence. Bob Baffert.
Yep.
I mean, to put that trust in him so early spoke volumes to everyone else about his ability.
But I think everyone, especially in Southern California, if you talk to a lot of trainers, they'll tell you day in, day out for the last few years, Martin Garcia is a guy that's worked hard. You tell him to be there at 5, he's there at 4:45 with a smile on his face. He earned those mounts, and he deserved the recognition.
And when you ride for Bob Baffert, more chances you're going to win a Triple Crown race, right? They go hand in hand as well.
We've got to talk about the other side of that coin with Garrett Gomez, a guy who's on top of the world as far as jockeys go in the sport of thoroughbred racing in 2009, and then this blip in 2010. It's not often you see such a great jockey with such a downside here and being taken off a horse like that.
But in true Garrett Gomez fashion, he winds up the year with maybe the biggest win of the year. But there was no doubt it could have gone the wrong way his season after what happened on the Triple Crown Trail. You could tell it really affected him, but somehow he came back in the fall.
Yeah, he certainly did, and that's what good jocks do. They always rebound from poor performances, whether it was his fault or the post position with Looking at Lucky in the Derby. He came back with a bang in 2010 towards the end.
All right, at the end of the year, how about a little where are they now for the Kentucky Derby, Preakness, and Belmont winners? Obviously, looking at Lucky, had the best career of all the 3-year-olds. But where do you think those other 2 horses are now? What do you think is going to become of them in 2011?
I wish, I'm glad you brought up Looking at Lucky. I wish we had another year with him.
Yep.
I think that's the other big disappointment out of this 3-year-old crop is we're not going to see the best horses emerge to their 4-year-old season. Looking at Lucky is one that I think we only saw the surface of his true potential.
I would agree with you there. I mean, he was only one of 3 2-year-olds, champion 2-year-olds that have actually won a Triple Crown race. Sunday Silence and Street Sense were the other 2. So he was one horse that actually transferred that form from 2 to 3, and it could have gone on to 4. He's retired. Super Saver's retired. Drosselmeyer was retired for about 3 months in the middle of the year. He's come back, and hopefully we'll see him in 2011 in a depleted handicap division.